Hi, and welcome to Talking Shop in the Shop, a podcast hosted here at Cool Beans in West Sayville. I'm your host, Frank Gucciardo, Executive Director at orderplans.com, a division of PKAD Architecture and Design. And so this week, we're very grateful to have with us Andrew Massimo from U.S. Solar Enterprises. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And it's great that we have various folks that are attached to real estate transaction space and topics of real estate, and on the build side or on the sell side or the buy side or the legal side. And this was really neat. I thought we had have an opportunity to have a specialist who's in the solar industry. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about what U.S. Solar does and kind of where you are in the space, and tell our audience a little bit about what you do.
So I've been in the industry for 10 years, and I've learned this industry in and out. From the residential side, touched upon some really good commercial end of things, and the industry has changed wildly in the past few years. And just like the real estate, interest rates are nuts. So there are some special ways to go about getting solar.
Right.
And then with all that's going on in the industry, it's important for people to know.
Right. So 10 years, you've seen it up and down, and
oh yeah.
So solar now I think is sort of a mainstay, right? And with all the conversations of clean and green energy, this has been now we're kind of reaching a peak a little bit. So why don't we maybe take it from the top? Talk about, if you could, explain to us just a little bit about what is solar. I mean, I don't know, people see it on everyone's roofs, and maybe you just kind of talk a little bit about the high level stuff, like
Yeah. So as of right now, people are going to the utility, right? Everybody's buying power from PSE&G, Con Edison out here in Long Island, New York, and what they're experiencing is increases, right?
In energy cost.
Correct.
Right.
The average is 3.5% increase. Now, if you're at 3.5% increase, could you imagine what your bill is going to look like in 10 years?
Wow.
On top of that, what's happening is the utilities are getting smarter. They're saying we're losing customers hand over fist, right? Because they're used to getting paid from everybody. Now they're losing customers hand over fist, and they're only getting a small connection fee of $14, $15 to $18 a month.
Right.
That's all they're getting to be a delivery boy at this point.
Where were they losing the clients to?
They're losing the clients because the clients are making their own power now.
Oh. Huh.
So it's a downward spiral for the utility. They're becoming a delivery boy.
I see. So they're losing clients to the energy being produced
By the homeowner. Yeah.
Huh. So they're actually being negatively affected.
The utility, absolutely. So what the utility is trying to do is find ways to stay in the game.
Right.
Make their own service power, right? Charge clients that don't have solar an extra tax.
Really?
Yeah, they're trying to get as much money as they can before it gets pretty bad.
So I live in a heavily treed neighborhood. We don't have a lot of solar hours. So it just never made sense for us. So you're saying that I could potentially have a tax?
So yes,
Really?
If you don't have solar yet, eventually, if you haven't seen it yet, you're going to start seeing some additional tax added onto your bill.
Wow, that's interesting.
Now this happens, you follow the trends. California was leading the industry in the solar, and they started putting tax on to anybody that was looking to go solar within the state. They got rid of the state credits, things like that. They tried to slow down what was going on.
California didn't want solar panels going up?
Everybody went solar out there, right? It was a solar boom. They were
Right.
leading the industry. They had great incentives at first. Now that, as you can see, they actually have scheduled brownouts. You heard about those?
Yeah.
So those scheduled brownouts are happening because their grid can't sustain all the power all at once. So when all these houses all now have their own grids, they're all making their own power, guess what happens to that excess power? It goes back to the grid. So now all these people are making all this extra power, and it's sending it back to the grid. The grid can't sustain it.
It's too much juice going in. The input, it's not a brownout because of the output. Oh, really? That's interesting. Huh. So you put the solar panels, are you a a rep, or do you do the install too? Or tell me about
So
what
our
your
company,
scope is.
yeah, so our company, we do both sales and installation.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different Trivago companies. They're just the sales aspect of the deal. They'll go to an installer in the neighborhood and they'll say, hey, do my installations for a certain red line price. In the industry, red line means what is your lowest price to
Yeah,
do the
sure.
install with everything included.
Sure.
So we do both. We got channel partners and then we do our own in-house
So
sales.
you'll take the responsibility of nose to tail, sale to install, and everything in between.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's great. That's great that you have that experience, not just on the sales side. So maybe why don't you just talk a little bit through the process of, let's talk about the install. What has to happen? Is this tell us what's the sort of the paperwork and the logistics up front from your client signs on to I get a permit, and then the installation and what to expect. So what happens after they've signed on the dotted line? This is a decision for me, yes. Andrew, come on in and take care of it. What happens?
So after we get a signature and everything's approved, what's going to happen is we're going to schedule a site assessment. Site assessment, somebody's going to come over and measure the roof, make sure the roof is sustainable for the weight and for the application of solar.
Right.
Sometimes we'll find some rafters or 24 on center, things like that.
I was going to say, so someone goes up into the attic and they're going to measure rafter sizes and spacing.
Exactly. So based on snow loads, wind loads, important information, we need to know that that this house and this roof is going to sustain this weight and be able to handle the load.
Right.
So at that point,
and how do you? I'm sorry to interrupt. My brain's running. How do you measure how do you obtain your roof plan? Let's say.
So everybody has to go to an architect engineer.
Ah.
And it has to get approved through an architect engineer.
Gotcha. So the architect will come out and measure the whole building, or just the footprint, or what are they grabbing?
So what we grab is the rafter spans, the width and length of the rafters. We grab electrical. Electrical is a big portion of this thing. If your electrical panel is outdated, it needs to be updated because either you're backfeeding your panel with a backfed breaker, or you're tapping onto what we call a sideline tap, which is your main feeds that come from your meter into the top of your main service panel.
Gotcha. So the architect's going to come out and he's going to measure I guess he's going to measure the footprint of the house, or get you a floor plan, and then slopes, right? I got a 5/12 or a 6/12 or whatever the pitch is. If it's real steep, or if it's you're kind of down here, right? I don't know, a 2/, and they're gonna give you that information.
Yeah. So the engineer doesn't go out there. We'll go out there. We'll gather all the information for the engineer.
Oh, okay.
We'll submit all this information to the engineer, and then it's up to him to say, all right, this is sound, or we need to upgrade the structure. Either I'm going to add sister rafters, upgrade the rafters, add a knee wall, things like that.
Gotcha. So they'll do the drawings, and then you're going to look at the box, and then come and speak with the electrician. Will there be an electrical engineer attached to this?
So there is a licensed electrician that's involved.
Right.
But either way, you have a building inspection and an electrical inspection. So your number one, your engineer needs to know the electrical aspects, and then he also needs to know the structural aspects.
Right. So there is an electrical engineer attached.
So yeah, usually you have an electrical engineer that knows the industry, that knows how to size the system correctly and make the proper strings. So he'll know the equipment, he'll know how much it produces, and he'll know how to size the system correctly, because you have an AC disconnect that has to go outside, that has a knife switch. That disconnect has to be properly sized along with those breakers inside that disconnect.
Gotcha. So this isn't something a homeowner's ever going to do on his own.
That's not true. Some DIY guys want to get involved. Some electricians that own houses, they want to do it themselves.
Gotcha.
So they can. They can do it
They can do
themselves.
it themselves.
But they will need an engineer to help them get the plan set in order to get the permit.
Right, so we need a stamp.
Yes.
You need that professional licensing for a stamp. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So you go through this piece, and then how do you then navigate the town? What do you do?
So in certain jurisdictions, you have expediting permits. They called fast tracks for solar. Villages are not so easy. They like to at least get the property survey. The village is a little bit more distinct. Sometimes you have to go in front of an architectural review board, which I have a meeting today in Lynbrook for an architectural review board. And some of them say, we don't want it on the front of the house. You're not allowed to put solar on the front of the house. You know, some of them say you're not allowed to have panels in landscape, which means sideways instead of long ways. Yeah. They need to know where the pipe run goes because they want this to be very visually appealing to the curb appeal of the home.
Right. So you have, your office handles the site work, photography, conditions. It goes to the architect. They draft it, do what they need to do, size, shore up beams, whatnot, electrical components, all this gets documented. They may need a survey, and that's your soft package that goes off to the town.
Correct, yeah. So most of the villages, they require a property survey. You know, certain jurisdictions like Brookhaven or Hempstead, you could just go to the local town clerk and get the local survey. They have it on file. Right.
So they're not so concerned with, for solar, they're not so concerned with a fresh survey. I know, like for a building permit in, let's say, Oyster Bay, and I believe it's now 6 months also in Brookhaven. If there's talking about new structure, they want surveys that have a shelf life of 6 months or less.
Right.
So you can't give them something from 1962.
Correct. Right. So if it's really outdated, then they won't approve it. But you know, solar, it's much less of a hassle than doing dormers, extensions, even decks. You know, it's a pretty fast thing that the towns have figured out. And what are they called? They're the engineer review team in the towns that, you know, it goes onto their desk. They look at it. If they recognize the company that's doing this thing, they're like, all right, these guys know what they're doing. Right. They're going to push this thing fast.
Sure. So there is some absolute benefit to working with a long-standing reputable firm that has done multiples, as opposed to somebody always has to be first for a new company, but nobody wants to be first.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You want to be the guy that's been doing this for a decade.
Exactly. Yeah. New guys come in and they're like, oh, I want to do everything myself. These sales guys, they come in and they're like, all right, if I cut out the permitting, if I cut out the engineering, all right, let me get a better red line. So they try to reinvent the wheel and try to take over some roles and responsibilities, and sometimes they shoot themselves in the foot.
And they pay more. There's always enough money to. There's never enough money to do it right the first time, but there's always enough money to fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah, unfortunate. So that is sort of the tale of woe of homeowners and do-it-yourselfers. But all right, so how long a wait with the town when you submit?
It depends on the jurisdiction. So Brookhaven right now, you're looking at about 3 weeks.
Oh, that's reasonable. So from signing the dotted line to getting your permit, let's say, worst case scenario, you have to get a survey. How long could it be to launch?
Depends on how well oiled your machine is.
Right.
You know, if you have your guys lined up,
let's not talk about shooting the moon. Let's talk about, and not the worst case scenario, but kind of normal. Yeah, normal.
So on average, Hempstead, I'll get that back in a week, 14 days max.
But from the time that you start, you're making field measurements to the time that you get it back. What would you say that? What's reasonable?
So if you hit the median between everything, and we're not talking villages, you're looking at 2 week turnaround.
2 weeks from the time that you are on site to measure, drawings to the file, and permit in hand is 2 weeks?
Yes.
It's pretty fast, okay. And if you're in a village, you got a snag?
Villages, you're looking about 3 to 4 weeks.
Gotcha. Okay, but still not terrible. And then how long would it, let's say, the average install go? How long would it take?
Typically, if you're a well-oiled machine, you'll get the job done in a day. That's based on a 12K and below. When I say 12K, that's a 12 kilowatt system. Anything above a 12K, if it's steep pitch, you have a 40-degree pitch, things like that.
Yeah.
You want to give your guys some slack. Give them the 2 days.
Yeah.
Give them the quality that,
sure, they got
that
to tie
needs to
off
happen
and
and
all the
tie
OSHA
up.
things.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. So you don't want guys up there without harnesses and rope, right?
No, it's a huge liability to have guys on the roof doing electricity and carrying these panels. It's like carrying a piece of plywood up the roof,
right.
It's not an easy task.
Right.
So safety is major.
So the insurances must be absurd.
Oh, yeah. Workers' comp is crazy. Luckily, I haven't had any incidents in the past few years. We've been really good, but workers' comp is insane.
Sure. So they're tied off, and that's something you want to see in an install, right? If you were a homeowner and you were going to ask questions of a reputable firm on the install side, well, what questions should they be asking?
So number one, you're licensed and insured. Number two, are you a full-fledged company? Do you do the sale or do the installation, or are you subbing it out? Because a lot of these people, they sub their installs out.
Right.
So
you look good, but Tommy shows up and who knows what we got coming.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So license, insured, do you sub it out? What other questions would you want to know if you were a savvy homeowner? If you want to give them like an inside question that hey, if you answer this question right, you got somebody good.
Production guarantee.
Production guarantee.
Production guarantee is so important because people could go into your home, they could undersize your system, and by the time it's all said and done, you end up having a bill.
You get a bill from who?
PSE&G and the solar company.
So they undersize it, meaning that it's not producing enough juice, and now you're still paying for, you need 10 units, but it's only producing 8 units. You got to pay for the 2.
So I go into these homes, and I have my competitors' quotes right in front of me, and I realize that something's wrong here. They're projecting a 7 kW when I'm here, and I'm doing almost like a 10 kW. And I say, well, let's look at their proposal. And let's see what their electric bill, their annual usage that they're basing this off of. And I'm seeing that it's a little lower than it should be, so of course their numbers are going to be cheaper.
Oh, so if they size you for 7, and that net cost is X, and you size it for 10, but you're X plus 1, but if 7 yields plus 3 cost, you're actually cheaper.
So yes, the
You're
smaller
actually
system,
cheaper.
the smaller system is going to be cheaper. Don't get me wrong.
Right, but you're going to have that spread from PSE&G that is going to hound you for the life of. Whereas we're done.
Yes. So the biggest thing is making sure that your annual consumption is correct from the start. They need to size your system correctly.
So when they're getting estimates, that should be one of the things that should be across the board. Should be the same number.
Yes.
Pretty close.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
What's a red flag? Like he's off 10 points, 10% from this guy. Is it a 5% off? Is it like the red flag? Is it 30%? Like where should they be? Something's not right. They get 2 numbers that are close and another guy's off. What does off mean?
So
like what's the tolerance?
It's usually you want to be within a tolerance of 2 kW, which is
Okay.
2 kW. That's kind of where the sweet spot is. Anything above a 2 kW difference, there's something wrong.
Something wrong.
Because you want to leave the customer some room to grow for the future, because the utility rate increases 3.5% on average. So in 10 years, is that system that they gave them at 100% or 110% going to be enough 10 years later? Sure,
because I have I had a very young family, and now I'm sort of like in the middle of fatherhood. I've got a 16-year-old and I got a 7-year-old. There's 4 of us. There's 4 sons. But at one point it was just the 2 boys, and our growth, our consumption is way different than when we were a young family, right? So so that makes a lot of sense. Okay. All right, so we've got a 2K spread is the tolerance. Look at your numbers. You've asked questions. Talk to me about, because I have some clients that when they come to us on the full service design side of things, I'm thinking of a client over here in Northport. They were talking about a 20 kilowatt standby Generac liquid propane fired standby And then the husband was saying, well, what if I put solar up? And I said, well, you know, you need a different system to store energy versus feed the meter. So maybe you could talk about and I'm sure there's some industry lingo for feeding the meter versus a DC unit on home. So maybe talk to that point.
Yeah,
and the differences.
So there's a lot to go about with this one. So first you have to understand net metering. What is net metering? Net metering is the utility, the grid is going to put in a meter. If you don't have a smart meter already, they're going to put in this meter, and that meter is not only going to take your consumption, how much energy you're using, but now it's going to measure your production. So during the day, you're going to produce, and you're probably going to overproduce more than you consume. So what happens to that excess energy? Well, it's going to go back into the grid, and the grid is going to take account of all that. I like to refer to it as like AT&T rollover minutes.
Right.
So now we're accumulating credits.
Right.
So your question is, why do I have a battery backup, right?
But what happens if, like, so let's make it practical. Another hurricane rolls through town.
Mm-hmm.
We get more Canadian wildfires and blots out the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Will you still have power if power's down across the grid? Will you still have power at your house if you have solar feeding the meter?
So, no. Biggest misconception is if I have solar, I am technically connected to the grid, but I will have power if it goes down. Biggest misconception about solar.
Gotcha.
You will not have power unless you have a battery backup.
A battery backup.
Or if you have an end phase, it's called an end phase. It's not a battery backup. I forget what it's called. I installed them a few times, but end phase IQ8 modules, right? They're these little micros that go on the back of these panels. These little micros, they're the computer of the system, and it's so important. End phase is killing the game. They have a system now where it will produce power on its own without having AC power connected. So if the grid goes down and you have a power switch, what's going to happen with end phase is it'll keep lights on. It ain't going to run your motors like if you have, let's say, refrigerators,
right,
washer dryers,
right.
AC
Energy
units.
hog is not going to do it, but
it's going to suck it all dry.
Right, but little LCDs or LEDs or small things trickle
Yes.
out. Right.
Yeah,
it'll have something on.
It'll keep your lights on.
Keep your lights on, right. But if you wanted to, like my client, not have a fossil fuel generated power and you want to stay clean, you're saying you ever put some batteries in the house? Like what kind of batteries? Like D cells for your flashlight, or?
So no. So the battery backups out there right now are mainly all lithium batteries.
Gotcha.
Right? Lithium ion batteries, and Tesla's doing the same thing.
Yep.
And they're inside they're inside the end phase as well.
Yep.
And what's going to happen is your solar is going to charge these all these batteries, and during the day you're fully charged. So at night you're not producing any power. So now you have a choice to either do a self-consumption mode, which means take power from the batteries instead of now taking it from the grid. So now you're almost completely off the grid. Your utility is now just your backup.
Utility's the backup.
Yeah.
And so the solar energy feeds the battery, then the battery then feeds the property, right? Your energy use, your consumption.
Mm-hmm.
If the batteries are exhausted, the utilities take over.
Correct.
Gotcha. So you could size that however you wanted to.
Yeah. So the biggest thing about sizing batteries is you have to think about your critical loads first. What do I want backed up when the power goes out? I want my fridge. I want my lights. I want some AC.
Yep.
And maybe a washer dryer, but
right.
definitely my heat.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So with those critical loads, we have to figure out, all right, how much power is that going to draw every hour?
Right.
You know, with everything working at full capacity, how many hours do I have left for these batteries to drain?
Right.
You know?
So sounds like the world of an engineer now at this point. So
Oh,
these
yeah.
are going to be more complicated with higher costs, I would imagine.
Yeah. No,
Right?
absolutely.
And
Making sure that it's sized with your critical loads
Right.
and figuring all that load calculation
Right.
out.
So we go from structure, roof rafters and size spacing and will the snow loads and the weight of the unit hold on the existing roof. Then if we're going to go to a self-contained battery piece, the engineer now has to come and run all the calc loads, size the batteries, put this all together, and then that's permitted. I would imagine all that's going to be inspected and.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's a heavy deal.
you have to build your system according to the engineer plan set. If
Right.
there's something off, there's one thing off. Number one, if you put a panel in a firewalk area, town's going to fail you. You need that firewalk area so the firemen can walk up and do what they have to do.
Sure.
If your loads are off or you put a wrong sticker on your equipment, you're going to fail.
Right. Gotcha. So this is going to be regulated, engineers, licensed. Even as architects, I wouldn't touch this. I'm not sizing electric, right? That's going to go to the MEP engineer, and they're going to size this up. And when my client was vacillating between liquid propane, Generac 20 kilowatt or Tesla batteries, it's a call to Delandro Engineering to say we're going to need a size on this if they're going to go this direction, right? So,
Yeah.
And then you would then come in then and follow the normal course of, right? We're going to put this in and it's going to get all hooked up and then inspected.
Yep. No, so the inspection process is fairly easy. Once we're installed, what we're able to do is, once we're installed, the immediate thing that we like to do is we're going to call our electrical inspector. He's going to come out within 7 days of installation
Yep.
completion.
Yep.
He's going to look at all the electrical equipment, make sure all the stickers and stuff like that are done,
Yep.
and make sure it matches plan set. And usually our electrical inspectors know us so well
Right.
that they'll even accept pictures. They're so good.
Yeah, sure. Again, one of the benefits of working with a long-standing firm. So, does it ever occur where maybe folks may not pull a permit for this kind of work?
So that's a great question. So a lot of customers, sometimes I run into, they're DIY guys, right? They want to do it themselves. They want to be able to produce the power. So can they do this to their home? Legally, you shouldn't, right? Because you need permits for this stuff.
Sure.
Because you're doing electric and you're doing structural stuff.
Yep.
Right? You're adding weight loads to your roof and you're tapping onto your main service panel or backfeeding your panel, which you need license. You need to make sure this is done correctly. But there are people out there that want to do it themselves, and needless to say, they're going to do it regardless.
Right.
They're going to get it done. But the problem is that once it's on there, it's like building a dormer without a permit.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know? You could get in trouble for that.
Oh
stuff.
yeah. We clients are calling us every day, multiple times a day, and there's an issue. So then again, for our colleagues in the real estate transaction space, they're going to go sell a house. Client does it himself, maybe doesn't pull a permit, any number of here we are now, and they want to transact and they want to sell. So first, let's talk about the guy that did it right, pulled the permit, signed the contract with you, you've installed it, everything went off great, expectations were met, everyone's happy. Now the seller is upgrading a house or he's moving out of state and now he's leaving. What happens to the equipment? Is he still responsible? The new owner? What happens there?
Another really awesome question. It all depends on how they structure the deal.
Okay.
If it's a lease option, it's very hard to get out of a lease.
So if you're leasing, all right, so let's talk about this. So you have an option to lease or buy?
So there's technically 4 ways to go solar.
Okay.
Number 1 is cash deal. If you go cash deal, you benefit from the tax incentives. You get that money back the following tax year.
Right.
Right, if you qualify for those incentives. The second one is financing it.
Okay.
So you're paying a financier. They give you a loan.
And that's what you were saying earlier, that the finance, the cost to borrow money now is tough.
The interest
Very
rates
thick.
are ridiculous.
Okay. So we have We can finance this. Okay, so cash finance,
And then you have leasing,
leasing,
which is the worst.
the worst. So you don't actually own it. You're gonna rent
Correct.
it it's gonna cost you a little less out of pocket.
So,
But
some companies will allow you to buy out later on, like far later, like year 25, but it stays on the home. If you look through that contract, it stays on the home. If you move, they say they'll take it, you can take it with you, we'll take it down, but does that make sense? Taking those panels and penetrations that go through your roof into your rafter beams,
oh my word,
taking that off makes no sense at all.
And then in 20 years, I would imagine the technology has to change.
Oh,
The technology you have today has got to be way different than it was
Yes.
15 years ago,
Yes.
or even 10 years ago when you started. It's got to be better now.
So a lot of systems 10 years ago are starting to upgrade.
Got it.
Because they have old microinverters. They're only pushing, 200 watts. Now we're at 420 watts.
Gotcha.
So a 200-watt system ain't producing
you've
enough
doubled.
anymore.
You've doubled your capacity.
Yes, the
Right.
panels have doubled their capacity in the past 10 years.
Gotcha. So leasing is not a great option. It means you don't own it.
Exactly. Leasing is a terrible option. It's tied to the house, and for you to get rid of it, you have to really pay this thing out and pay the big bucks, because
Gotcha.
you're losing. If you're leasing, you don't get the 30%. You can get the $5,000 from state in New York, but you have to qualify for that.
Got it.
And then the next option, and this is the best option in the industry right now.
Right.
It's called a PPA Easy.
PPA Easy.
It's a power purchase agreement, which allows you to buy out any year. Usually you want to buy out year 5, 5th year anniversary, but this allows you to take advantage of the state credit, and then the PPA Easy, the financier will take the 30% Fed. But we like to take that off the price to start with. So it's almost as if you're getting the 30% federal, you claim your $5,000, and in 5 years, you buy this thing out. But here's the nightmare. Everything is in underwriting. Let's say if the new homeowner that you're going to sell your house, the new homeowner doesn't want to take over the payments on the solar system, well, then they got to buy that system outright before they move in.
The buyer.
Correct.
He doesn't want the payment. He's got to cash out.
He's got to buy the whole thing out.
So there's an extra layer on solar. So if you're a buyer, you need to be in the market for a solar system attached to the property. But if it's leased and you're the seller, then can the buyer take over the lease?
He has no choice.
He has to take it.
Has to take over the lease.
Or you've got to buy it out, I guess.
So if that homeowner that's selling that home got into a bad lease deal, the next homeowner's in that same bad lease deal, unless they buy that system out.
So what do you recommend a person considering? How does the person who wants to purchase or be involved with solar, how do they mitigate their downside? How do they, the risk management side, how do they know they get a good contract?
It's important to read through your contracts. I read through my competitors' contracts a lot when I'm in the home and I compete, and I rip these things apart, man. I find the stuff that nobody likes to talk about. And the homeowner, it's beyond me why they don't read through these things.
I remember my father-in-law. He was considering. I read the contract and I said, you've got these are the downsides. Did you read this?
Yeah.
And he looked at me with wide eyes, and I said, I'm not an attorney, but did you read this? Like, you're stuck with this.
That's right.
So do your clients, do they ever seek legal counsel? Do they ever talk to, how do they know the contract's good?
So I have a lot of customers, I'm not going to name the company, but they want out of their leases. And I tell them, look, you have to take this up with an attorney. I can't pull the system down unless you decide to buy it out. You're stuck with that unless you go to court.
Gotcha.
So the new customers that I'm selling to, I make sure that I tell them the good and the bad part of all contracts.
Got it.
So that they understand when you go to sell, you have a choice. You're either going to sell it with the market price, the sticker price that you got it for, so that you can make a buck off of the solar system, which is everybody's goal. Let me make money off of this thing because I received the federal tax credits.
Yeah, right.
I received the state. So
I got the discount,
I technically
so I
got
can-
the 50% off. Now
I'm
I
gonna
sell
sell
this
it at
at
full
full
price.
sticker price.
Right.
But you have to take into consideration depreciation value.
Of the value, right.
Right? So the depreciation value depends on the system size. If you have the biggest system you could get, which is 25 kW, that system's going to lose about $2,000 worth per year.
Got it. So, okay, so I guess the take home here is the contract is important. And before anyone enters into a long-term lease contract or whatever the contract is, it would make sense for the homeowner maybe to have this reviewed by a professional.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Because not every contract is written the same.
No. A lot of these contracts are very different, very, very different. And there are some juggernauts in the solar industry, and they are the finance companies.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of the same solar installers and sales reps. They all offer the same finance companies. Some of the finance companies are really good.
Right.
Some of the finance companies are not good at all. You know, it all depends on who you decide to borrow money from,
So
who
it's
you
a
decide
really-
to lease from.
This is a really tricky industry.
Oh yeah, it's a very dark industry as well. You know, like I said, you know, if you get undersized to your system, and in that proposal or that contract, they don't show what your electric bill is going to be after you go solar, that's a no. That's a no-go. That's a huge red flag. And I've seen contracts that don't tell you how much your electric bill will be after you go solar.
Right.
It's
So,
hidden.
say that again to the homeowners. This is maybe a big
Look
take home.
at your contract or the proposal that they're proposing, and look to see if that utility bill after solar is on your contract. If they don't tell you how much your electricity bill is going to be after you go solar, that is the biggest red flag. Do not sign.
So that's a red flag.
Huge.
Oh, great. All right. So then I guess you have a transaction that happens. Of course, if there's no permits, it's like anything else. They have to go through the process of maintaining existing conditions and whatever upgrades. If they installed it and the spacing is is oversized and the lumber is undersized, then they're going to have to make corrective measures to get the permit. And nothing changes, whether it's a dormer or if it's a solar panels or a whatever. It's the same process of legalizing and maintaining existing structures. The biggest hang up here is getting into the deal right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the biggest thing is by far making sure the deal is done correctly.
Right.
You know, in the beginning of time, when solar first came out, they were all getting stuck in terrible leasing.
I bet.
And it caused everybody was shying away from leasing, and they're like, this is terrible. Now that PPAs came out, it's like a whole different world now.
Wow.
People could actually they don't have to take out a loan. They don't have to be tied to a huge loan. They don't have interest rates. Now they're just buying their power for a much cheaper cost and still taking advantage of the state incentive.
Well, that sounds great. So, well, good, Andrew. I think I learned a lot. It's not something that's always in our space, unless, of course, you have a rare client that wants to, have some kind of battery backup. Then something larger is happening at the space. But I thought this was great, and I hope the homeowners, our colleagues out there, learn something new. And you can always, get some information here and the information below the podcast, and reach out to US Solar for your needs. And it was great having you on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You guys
All
did
right.
great.
Yeah, great. All right. Till next time, we'll see you in West Sable at Cool Beans, talking shop in the shop.